He didn't know I'd been recording everything for 11 months before he put his hands on me. My family had a story about me, and they'd been telling it so long they believed every word. I was the one who couldn't hold a job. The one who moved back home at 28 after her big city plans fell apart. The one who sat in her bedroom all day staring at spreadsheets for some nobody consulting firm that paid pennies. My mother said it with a sad smile whenever her friends asked about her daughters. My older sister got the good introduction, the one with the MBA and the corner office and the husband with the jaw. I got the sigh and the subject change. My stepbrother got the most mileage out of it. He was 3 years younger than me, and somewhere along the way he decided that made him 3 years smarter. He borrowed my car twice without asking and returned it both times with an empty tank. He went through the emergency cash my mother kept in the kitchen drawer, $200 the first time, $350 the second, and when she noticed it missing, he looked her in the eye and said, "I probably took it." She believed him. She always believed him. I didn't correct her. I had learned, a long time ago, that there was no point. What my family did not know, what no one in that house knew, was that I hadn't been doing accounting work for a nobody consulting firm. I had been doing it for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a division of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. My actual title was Forensic Financial Analyst, GS-13. I worked remotely because the cases I worked required discretion, not proximity. My home office wasn't just a desk and a laptop. It was a certified secure workspace, reinforced door, encrypted drives, and because I handled witness cooperation cases that sometimes involved people who received threats, it had been equipped 18 months earlier with a continuous recording system covering every angle of the room, logging to an off-site federal server the moment I badged in each morning. I had a cover story for my family because my supervisor required it. Low-profile consulting work. Nothing interesting. They accepted it easily because it matched the version of me they'd already decided was true. I am telling you this now because it explains everything that happened after. It was a Tuesday in October, when my stepbrother came through my office door without knocking. I heard him in the hallway first, his voice, loud the way it always was when he wanted an audience, though the only audience was the house itself. He'd been staying with my mother and stepfather for 6 weeks at that point after losing his apartment, which he blamed on his landlord, and which everyone with eyes could see was about the 3 months of rent he hadn't paid. I had my headphones in. I was mid-call with a federal prosecutor in Baltimore, reviewing wire transfer sequences from a case that had been building for 2 years. I held up one finger without turning around. He didn't stop. He walked to my desk, reached across me, and closed my laptop. I pulled my headphones out. "I'm on a work call." "I need the car," he said. "Keys are in your bag." "I have a meeting." "Your little spreadsheet meeting." He said it the way he said most things to me, like the words themselves were embarrassing to pronounce. "It'll take 20 minutes. I have somewhere to be." I told him no. I told him to use a rideshare app, that I'd even pay for it, that I needed my car because I had a scheduled call that was already interrupted, and I needed to drive to a FedEx facility before 5 to drop off a sealed document package. All of that was true. He didn't care about any of it. What happened next took less than 4 minutes. He grabbed my bag off the hook by the door. I stood up. He told me to sit back down. I reached for the bag. He shoved me, hard, into the edge of my desk, and when I caught my balance and turned around, something in his face had shifted into a place I hadn't seen before. Not the casual contempt I'd grown up with. Something uglier. He told me I needed to learn my place in this house. I told him to get out of my office. He crossed the room in 3 steps. His forearm came up against my throat, and then I was against the wall, and the pressure was immediate and total, and I remember the ceiling light blurring at the edges before everything went gray. When I came back, I was on the floor. He was gone. My bag was gone with him. I sat there for a moment, just breathing, checking each breath to make sure air was actually moving. My throat felt like something had been wrung out of it. I pulled myself up using the desk chair, and the first thing I did before I called anyone, before I went to find my mother, before I did anything else was check the recording status indicator on my workstation monitor. Green, continuous, logged. I had been badged in since 7:43 that morning. I called my supervisor from my personal cell. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me 3 questions in the calm, specific way she asked everything. Was I physically safe? Was the workspace compromised? Was the subject aware of the recording system? No, no, and no. She told me to stay in the room, lock the door, and wait. I did not go to my mother first. I want to be honest about that. Part of me wanted to, part of me still had the reflex of going to her with things that hurt, the way you do when you've grown up expecting someone to be on your side. But I already knew what would happen. She would find a reason. She always found a reason. He was stressed. He didn't mean it that way. I must have said something. I'd seen her do it with every bruise on every wall and every missing dollar and every lie he'd told so smoothly. She'd ironed it flat and handed it back to him, folded. I locked the door and I waited. What I didn't know yet was that my stepbrother, after taking my car, had driven to a sports bar 12 minutes away, met 3 friends, and spent 2 hours there before one of them drove him back. I know this now because the investigators told me later. I also didn't know that he told at least one of those friends, in the parking lot afterward, that he had dealt with me. He said it casually, the way you say you handled an errand. He came back to the house at 7. I heard him downstairs. I heard my mother's voice, and then his, and then my stepfather's low rumble underneath both of them. I stayed in my room. I had already eaten. I had already documented everything I could, photos of my throat taken with my phone in the bathroom mirror, the bruising already starting to surface in a line across the left side. I had already sent those photos, time-stamped, to my supervisor. At 9:15, my mother knocked on my door. She didn't come in angry. That would have been easier. She came in soft and careful the way she did when she was about to ask me to do something I wasn't going to want to do. She sat on the corner of my bed and she said that my stepbrother had told her his side of things. She said he told her I grabbed his arm first. She said she wasn't taking sides, which meant she had already taken one. She said that things were tense in the house and maybe I could try to be a little more flexible about the car because I worked from home and he needed to get to job interviews. I looked at my mother for a long time without saying anything. Then I showed her the photos on my phone. She was quiet. She looked at the bruising across my throat and she was quiet for a moment that I thought might mean something. And then she said, "Honey, that could be from anything," and I understood that nothing had changed, that nothing was going to change, and that I had been waiting my entire adult life for a moment that was never coming. I told her goodnight. I locked the door behind her. 2 days later, a Tuesday, a woman from my agency's legal coordination office drove to the house in an unmarked car. She was not in uniform. She rang the doorbell and introduced herself to my stepfather, who answered, and she said she was there on a professional matter involving a federal workplace incident. My stepfather is not a stupid man. He went pale. My stepbrother was in the living room. I watched from the top of the stairs. The conversation was brief. The woman from legal explained that an incident had occurred in a federally designated workspace, which is what my home office was, formally, under the agreement I'd signed when I was approved for remote classified work. She explained that the incident had been recorded in full by a continuous logging system. She explained that the recording had already been reviewed by 2 supervisors and a federal legal officer. She explained that my stepbrother had the right to speak with an attorney before any further proceedings. He said, "And I will not forget this," he said, "she's just trying to get me in trouble." The woman from legal looked at him with an expression that I recognized because I had seen it in my own mirror. The expression of someone who has made peace with what is about to happen. She told him this was not about getting anyone in trouble. This was about what had already been documented. My mother started crying. My stepfather stood very still the way he did when he was trying to calculate something. My stepbrother looked up the stairs at me with an expression I had been seeing my whole life, the one that said he expected me to cave, to soften, to walk back down those stairs and tell everyone I was overreacting. And it was fine, and I was sorry for the trouble. I stayed at the top of the stairs and I did not move. What followed happened over the next 4 months. I am going to be specific because I know from watching other people go through things like this that the specifics matter. They matter because people want to know what actually happens and not just the shape of the ending. My stepbrother was charged with assault resulting in bodily injury. The federal workspace designation elevated the classification of the charge in ways that surprised even my stepfather, who had started hiring lawyers by the 2nd week. The video footage was forensically clear. You could see the entire sequence entry, escalation, the forearm across my throat, the duration, his departure. There was no ambiguity in the footage. There was nothing to negotiate with. His attorney tried 2 angles. The first was that the recording was invasive and inadmissible. It wasn't the workspace was documented. The recording was legally required under my remote work agreement. and I had not concealed it from any reasonable expectation of privacy in a room that was, by federal designation, not a private residence during work hours. That angle collapsed quickly. The second was that the altercation was mutual. The footage showed that it wasn't. That angle collapsed the same week. What the legal process also surfaced, and this part I did not anticipate, was that my stepbrother had a prior incident in another state. 3 years earlier, a restraining order filed by a former girlfriend that had been allowed to lapse without much follow-up. His attorney had hoped that wouldn't come up. It came up. My stepfather, meanwhile, had retained his own attorney, which told me everything I needed to know about how worried he was. He should have been. During the discovery process, investigators reviewed phone records as part of the standard documentation, and those records showed 2 calls between my stepfather and a former county employee who had, in an unrelated matter, once assisted my stepfather with a zoning dispute in a way that investigators found worth examining more closely. I am not going to say more than that because the related proceeding is still ongoing and I was told to be careful about what I say publicly. What I will say is that my stepfather's attorney filed for a continuance twice in 4 months, which tells you how the wind was blowing. My mother called me in December. I had moved out by then, into a short-term rental while I looked for a permanent place. I was not avoiding her calls. I was answering them. I just was not saying what she wanted me to say. She wanted me to consider the family. She wanted me to think about what all of this was doing to everyone. She used the word perspective 3 times in one phone call. And each time she used it, she meant I should adopt hers. I told her I loved her. I told her that was still true regardless of what happened. And I told her that I had spent 28 years shrinking myself to fit a story that was never accurate, and that I was not going to do it anymore, and that when she was ready to have a different kind of conversation, I would be there for it. She hung up. She called back 9 days later. Not to argue, just to talk. We did not solve anything in that call, but it was a different kind of conversation. I don't know what the future of that relationship looks like. I am not trying to predict it. What I know is that I am not willing to go back to what it was, and I think somewhere underneath everything she knows that too. My stepbrother pled guilty in February, after the trial date was set and it became clear the footage was going in. He received 18 months probation, mandatory anger management, and a formal prohibition from contacting me in any form. His attorney negotiated it down from what was originally on the table. I was not in the room for the negotiation. I did not need to be. The prosecutor called me afterward and asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine, which was true in the clinical sense and also true in a deeper sense that I was still working out the language for. She told me the footage had been among the clearest documentation she'd worked with in a workplace-adjacent assault case. She said it mattered that I had stayed in the room and checked the recording status before I did anything else. She meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. There's something I want to say about the recording, because I've thought about it a lot since everything ended. I didn't set up that recording system to catch my stepbrother. I didn't set it up to catch anyone in my family. I set it up because my job required it, because the cases I worked involved real risk to real people, and the government needed documentation standards met. And I happened to have a family that treated my professional life like a punchline at the same time. Those 2 facts collided in a way I never planned. But here's what I know. I spent a decade being the version of me that my family narrated. The failed one. The disappointing one. The one you could shove against a wall and take the car keys from because who was she going to tell, and who was going to believe her anyway? That version of me was always a fiction. I knew it, and I carried the weight of knowing it without being able to say it out loud. The recording didn't make me credible. I was always credible. The recording just made it impossible for anyone to pretend otherwise. I moved into a permanent apartment in March. It's on the 4th floor, which I like because of the light in the mornings. I have a proper home office now, 2 monitors, a standing desk, a plant I have managed not to kill for 6 weeks, which is a personal record. I still work for the same agency. I got a commendation in my last review for case documentation standards. My supervisor wrote in the notes that I demonstrated exceptional composure under adverse circumstances, which is maybe the most precise thing anyone has ever written about me. My sister called me last month, not my mother. My sister, the one with the MBA and the corner office and the husband with the jaw, she called to tell me that she'd always known what my stepbrother was, and that she was sorry she hadn't said it sooner. She said it like someone who had been rehearsing it. I think she had. I told her I appreciated it and I meant it. Even though what I also thought was, you could have said it 10 years ago. when it would have cost you something. But I didn't say that. I am learning to hold the truth and the gratitude in the same hand without letting one crush the other. I am not someone who believes in signposts or patterns that mean something larger. I am an analyst. I believe in data and documentation and what you can actually prove. But I will tell you that there is something specific about the experience of being told your whole life that you are one thing, and then watching the moment where every person who told you that has to sit across from the evidence that they were wrong. It is not triumphant, exactly. It is not the feeling I expected. It feels like finally exhaling after years of a held breath. Like something that had been pressed very tight for a very long time is taking its actual shape. I changed the name of the contact in my phone from stepfather to his first name. It's a small thing. I'm not sure it means anything to anyone but me. But I noticed when I did it that my hand didn't shake. That felt like something. I still drive the same car. He took it for 2 hours and came back smelling like beer, and the particular confidence of someone who has never once faced a real consequence. I cleaned the interior the next morning before I did anything else, wiped down the steering wheel, aired it out, put it back in order. Then I drove to the FedEx facility and dropped off the document package, which was 12 hours late but within the window I'd been given. The case it was part of closed successfully 8 months later. I can't tell you the details. What I can tell you is that my contribution to it is documented, permanent, and accurate. Not the story someone else decided to tell about me. Not a version shaped by someone's low expectations or convenient narrative. The actual record. That is the one thing I have always been able to count on. The actual record. Everything I am, everything I have built, every hour I put into work that my family waved away as nothing, none of that disappeared because they couldn't see it. It was there the whole time. Filed correctly, building towards something they were never going to anticipate, in a room they thought they already understood. He walked into that room thinking I was exactly what they'd all decided I was. He walked into the cleanest documentation of his own actions that any prosecutor in that district had seen in 3 years. He didn't know the difference. I did.